Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode in Season 2 of the People in Fundraising Professional Nonprofit webcast series. Today is Friday, July 14th, 2023, and I am really excited to welcome Lindsey Nadeau to our program. Hi, Lindsey.
Hey, Tim. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, it's an honor. Thank you. One of the reasons why I wanted to have Lindsey on the program is we've connected a little bit through Apra International committee work. I'm at the chapter level. Lindsey is a current Apra International board member and the incoming secretary. Apra International is the leading professional development organization for people in prospect research, management, data science. And in her day job, Lindsey is the vice president of data insights and campaigns at UNICEF USA. And it's a fully remote job for Lindsey, and I'm excited to hear, as we converse, Lindsey, a bit about the work you do, how you got there. We've got a couple of other great topics to cover revolving around the Apra board, time commitment and such like that. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Awesome. I'm excited.
Yeah. So Lindsey, let's dive right in, please, and tell us a bit about how you entered the nonprofit profession.
Cool. Okay. So I was actually 18 and I was working at American University's phone-a-thon as an undergrad. So I'm one of those phone-a-thoners. Started early. And, what's even funnier is maybe a year or two into doing it, because I did it all 4 years in undergrad, the annual fund tapped me to help research lost alumni. And I was using LexisNexis and Banner to update constituent records for years before I even graduated and became like a professional fundraising. And I had never really heard the term prospect research in the years that I was doing that research. It was so funny. And once I graduated, I entered into a 5-year BA MA program. And I had a 22-year-old life crisis when I realized I did not want to be the economist that program was going to turn me up to be. And while I was going to work my way through grad school, I had taken a catch-all fundraising role at a grassroots nonprofit. So I went from the phone-a-thon to a small nonprofit. Like our revenue budget was $12 million. It was super shoestring. And what I really loved, though, about that experience was I got to be exposed to so much about fundraising. It was a small scale, but we did it all. And I got like a front row seat to that. So I worked a lot with major giving. And I distinctly remember the moment where my boss at the time, the director of development, was like, "Have you ever heard of Wealth Engine? Let me show you it. All you need is a name and a zip code." It was like, a while ago. But that was like such a formative moment for me. But no one had still ever said the word prospect research to me. And over the course of my tenure there, I spent time with like the member services program. I was doing the gift processing, direct mail, events, plan giving. So like a lot of different stuff. And after about 4 years, I just was ready for something new. And my alma mater, where I had been a phone-a-thoner, posted an assistant director of research and prospect management role. And I didn't really know what it was, but I was just looking within the development and alumni relations division, what they had. And I was like, this kind of sounds like the event bios that I write and how I try to look people up and see like what their capacity to give might be an inclination. And I was like, I don't know what this prospect research thing is, the prospect management part was, but I don't know, I'll figure it out. And I applied and like swindled them into giving me the job that I felt vastly underqualified for, coming from this very small nonprofit. But it was really life-changing because American University is where I learned that like my job will be my career. And a big part of that was because my boss at the time was the Apra DC chapter president, and they sent me to Apra conferences. And I just had this huge epiphany. It was my first exposure to like what professionalized fundraising could be and what a well-resourced operation could be. And I really just cut my teeth there. And I've met so many Apra people, and I learned actually that prospect research was not necessarily my true one passion and love. It was more on the relationship management and like the BI, the business intelligence and CRM design is really where I love to spend my time now. But about 6 months into that job, my boss, Devin, who's that chapter president, sat me down and was like, I've been the chapter president for eons. I need to step back. You can be the next chapter president. And I was like, what? Like, no, that's a little intense. I was like, a little bit, but like, the Apra journey is so critical to how I've advanced my career that like years later, when I was the Apra DC president, one of my fellow Apra DC board members called me and was like, I have a job for you at GW. Her name's Ann Dean. She's one of my favorite professionals I've ever worked with. And that was super pivotal to go to GW because they kind of took it up a notch from where American University was at in their own maturity of fundraising. And I got to work with some of my mentors that I'd known before, which is amazing. Wow. I learned about like principal giving and how to like become the whisperer of your VP and like what it means to work with executives and help coach them. Really sophisticated portfolio management and projections, which is actually like my real one true love. I just love revenue forecasting. It's the thing that I still own because I love it that much. Awesome. Yeah. So then from GW, I was actually at the Apra conference in Phoenix, and then UNICEF USA's chief of staff for the development division saw me present on, I think it might have been due diligence or something. And she came up to me and she's like, I have a job for you in New York. Wow. And I was like, I'm not relocating. She's like, we could do remote. Okay. And I wasn't even like looking, but like, that's the power of Apra in my mind is like my last 2 jobs were just Apra Kismet. I don't know. It's amazing.
Wow. Wow. That is a great story illustrating the power of this Apra community. So cool. So thank you for that, Lindsey. And I would love to dive in about the work you do at UNICEF USA for a moment, and then let's go on from there to the Apra International board membership and just the thought process of seeing the impact it's had on your career, and what were the motivations that you considered as you wanted to become a member of the board and then started working with the board.
Okay, great, cool. Yeah, we can start with UNICEF USA.
Yeah.
So some of my work at UNICEF USA is focused on the core of prospect development. I lead the prospect intelligence and the relationship management vertical. And we don't call it data science, but our reporting and analytics, we call it philanthropy data strategy.
Oh, okay.
I also have the gift processing team and campaign planning. So it's a bit more of like advancement services. We're missing stewardship that sits in a different area. We don't really have a constituent record or biorecs or LumRecs, whatever you call that. We're working on that. But really the work at UNICEF USA, when I arrived, we were a much smaller team. There were about 5 positions that reported to me as the Senior Director of Prospect Development. We then launched a campaign and bootstrapped that. We didn't have campaign counsel, and my team grew a little bit more as we got investment for that. And then when the gift processing team moved to me, it grew even more. And so now we're about up to like 20 roles in about 3 years. So it has been an immense amount of change management, culture, adaptation, and evolution. And I am just so lucky to have the team that I do. Many of them are involved in Apra, which obviously makes my heart fill with pride. They're so innovative, such team players. They bring such a wealth of knowledge and diverse experiences to the table. It's my favorite job I've ever had.
That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. And so cool that team has grown so much and just a relatively 3-ish year timeframe.
Yeah. And, not a lot of people have left, partly because UNICEF USA has just created such a flexible environment. When the pandemic hit, they allowed anyone who wanted to go fully remote. We can flex our hours. We work with people all across the globe, really, because we do work with UNICEF colleagues. And we have unlimited PTO. The culture at UNICEF USA is one of the reasons why I stay. It's like the team and the culture and the vision of our leadership, which is very much data driven. Even if we're not perfect, we got some data problems we're still working through, some foundational stuff we're building.
Yeah.
But vision is there, and everything else just is really aligned for me.
Wow, that's awesome.
And then I think your second question was about the aspirations for the board.
So let's pivot to APRA. So you just outlined your day-to-day responsibilities at UNICEF USA, which sounds like in itself a tremendous undertaking. I also know that you're a presenter and you've written articles, and we'll get into some of that with policy documents. So adding more to your plate by coming on to the Apra International board. And before we went live with our recording, Lindsey and I talked a little bit about what she was anticipating sharing about, demystifying for our audience what committee, chapter, and board membership in Apra entails. So I'd love for you to take it from there, Lindsey, please.
Sure, definitely. So I did come up through the chapter leadership program, and I have served on many different volunteer committees through Apra International, and now have that last part of my journey as a Apra International board of directors. And as an Apra chapter leader, you are both setting some strategic vision for your chapter and you are executing. And it's a lot of roll up your sleeves, and it's a big time commitment. I spent a lot of time running up DC, even with a board of 10 people. I was super lucky to have a large, pretty supportive and active, engaged board to lean on, but that was a big time commitment. As a APRA committee volunteer, there's a framework in which the committees operate. There are usually a chair or co-chair. We also have task forces as well. And every term runs from September to August. A committee has a set of charges and KPIs that they are trying to work collaboratively and with the support of the APRA staff to achieve. And those are all rooted in the strategic plan. So the International Board of Directors for APRA goes through strategic planning, and it's a very futuristic thing. So we are constantly thinking about, where's the industry going? Where should we position ourselves? And what is in the best interest of our members? It is really rooted in, what does our membership mean, and how do we grow our influence in the industry more broadly? And so as we set the strategic plan, then we go through an annual planning process about what committees do we need, and what would the mandates for those committees be that derive and cascade from our strategic plan. And then we get periodic updates. As you know, you're a co-chair of one of our committees. The chairs send us updates on here's how far we are in making progress towards some of these strategic plan imperatives or KPIs. And so when you are on the APRA board, it's less doing, it's more thinking about the direction, weighing different trade-offs in our decision making, charting a course for the future of our organization, and where do we want to be in 3, 5, 10 years.
Wow.
The committee work is a little bit more hands-on. They're owning projects, or they're helping an author develop content, or they're planning a conference. And so the chapter and the committee work often are much more execution focused, whereas the Apra International board is more strategy alignment, futurism, advising the committees, because that is actually an important role for many of our board members. We serve as a liaison to different committee chairs or co-chairs, and we help connect the work that they are doing to the strategic plan. we help cross-pollinate across the committees because we're all reading each committee's KPI reports. And we're
Wow.
generally aware of the big initiatives that are going on across the entire association. And when the committees have questions or they're uncertain about something, we're that liaison back to the board. Or like if we asked a committee to come up with a recommendation, let's say on our new associate membership level, those deliverables then come up to the board, and the board member helps the full board, the board liaison helps the full board understand what was the committee's thinking. Do we think we have room to like tweak here or there, or like, oh, this is really great, we're blown away. Like all of those things, have happened. And then we vote and we approve on the course of action, and then communicate back down to the committees to move things forward, or like maybe it's going to be tabled till the next committee cycle to actually implement now that we've gotten it approved. So it's like, that's kind of the ecosystem of a lot of the work that we do. Yeah.
Wow. That's so insightful because you mentioned I serve on a committee and I'm very peripherally aware, even at the committee connected level, of what the board is doing. So thank you for that. I would love if you would spend a few minutes just talking with us about what you have gained from being on the international committee and even the other volunteer work you've done with CASE and AASP, AFP. What have you benefited from, giving the time, the talent you have, and how would you message that to people in our profession, in the prospect development landscape, to help them think through, well, this may be something I want to pursue in a volunteer leadership capacity down the road?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, there's a lot of different facets to what I've gotten out of my engagement with APRA, and you can kind of make it what you want it to be by picking level of engagement and roles that you're looking for, or at least throw your hat in the ring from. For me, it's been equal parts building relationships and advancing my career and figuring out what I'm really capable of beyond like research, relationship management, data, and pushing myself to grow in ways that I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do in my day-to-day work. I'm never going to sit on a foundation board, but APRA gives me that opportunity as a volunteer. And so I start to understand a little bit more about like what some of our foundation funders might be going through, obviously on a much smaller scale than some of the makeup foundations, but there's like parallel connections there. Or, building or helping advise on our content roadmap or our online course roadmap. Like, what will the next online course that APRA builds be? And like helping shape that. That taps into creativity, content trends, member needs, and parsing through the member like survey.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Just, it's a completely different side, and it's more creative in my opinion sometimes than some of the things that I get to do day to day. And so for me, I find this skill development super helpful. The relationships that I mentioned, like for me, my APRA journey is just punctuated by moments in time where I met different people who will either be lifelong friends, like I know you're having Catherine Flatten on, or just did, and she's one of my BFFs now, and we met through APRA. But also like people who have influenced and shaped my career. So, I distinctly remember the moment that I met Carrick at the APRA Chapter Leader Summit in Nashville. He was sitting in the back of the Chapter Leader Summit and he was cracking jokes. And I was like, he's funny, I'm going to go be his friend. And now we're on the board together. And I think those relationships are so pivotal to shaping your journeys because this field is so giving. You can follow up with people that you meet or see that they're posting something on our online community forums, and they will likely respond and help you. Like, it's so amazing what our APRA peeps community does for one another. And, you mentioned some of my other volunteer commitments. And for example, like the CASE ones, I was introduced to the case. They used to call it development researchers. Now they call it prospect development, partly because Carrick and I advocated for that. But I was introduced to that faculty program because of Carrick. Like we had connected for a couple years, and then he was, I think, co-chairing it or chairing it one year, and asked me to be on the faculty with him.
Oh, cool.
My volunteer work with AASP happened after I met Bond Lammy, who was a former Apra president. I was looking to get more involved and take a volunteer role on, and she marched me up to Sarah Daly, who's the current secretary of the Apra board, and was like, Sarah, you chair the AASP Best Practices Committee for Prospect Development.
Wow.
Here's Lindsey. Yeah, right? Like just all of these moments in time of the relationships. And it's like, that's what we do in real life, right? Like relationship mapping and our prospect development work. And
it's true.
Of how do you maximize those and leverage those and like round yourself out? Because I definitely think that the stretch roles I've taken on with APRA, AASP, CASE, etc., have really grown me beyond and made me more of an attractive recruitment prospect for other orgs and justified promotions and lent credibility to expertise.
Yes.
Organizations. So that's what I see in all of it.
That was a wonderful and wide-ranging answer. And I love the different dimensions of how that has been very consequential in a good way for you. The relationship building, maintaining those relationships, the impact it's had on your career with promotions and such. And I think that, that was one of the reasons why I launched my webcast, is that, I really value connecting with new people and staying really close with people that I've built connections with. And I thought I'd just love to share their stories. And so that's why, I launched this 1.5 years ago. And if we hadn't connected through committee work and APRA, I would have known you through Prospect Del or something. But just that's such a great benefit of being involved with whatever the organization is. It could be APRA, AASP, and such. So thank you for that. I would love, Lindsey, for a few minutes of your time to talk about how you balance or integrate all of this with everything else going on in your life. You mentioned that you're an equestrian and you have a young family, and your husband has rightfully, obviously, his own interests. So how do you integrate, support all of the meaningful pursuits that you're involved with?
Yeah, and maybe it'd be helpful if I kind of give like a little bit of an estimate from my experience on the board of like what it means to be on the board right now.
Yeah.
That's definitely my biggest volunteer commitment, even with the other ones. So as a director, I spend probably somewhere between 3 and 7 hours a month on APRA commitments, which is a lot. That's more than being on a committee.
Yeah.
Usually. Depends what committee you're on and what role you have. But generally, I think you could say that that's more. There's quarterly board meetings, and we have to prep for those, and those happen during the day. So we have to carve out time from our day jobs. So we're very uber committed to APRA to do that. But I also am liaising with 2 committees right now, and I do sit on the foundation board, as I mentioned. So that's 3 hours a month of standing meetings, and sometimes there's like follow-up conversations and things like that. So that's kind of why I say like 3 to 7. 7 would be like there's a quarterly board meeting, and I have all of my liaison meetings that month as well.
Okay.
And as I'm preparing to step into the secretary role, which is an executive committee role, that makeup's going to change a little bit because I'll have a monthly executive committee call, but I will have a little bit lighter of a load on the liaison work. So it's going to like offset. They try to make it manageable because they realize that we are volunteers and that we have full-time day jobs and our whole personal selves to manage.
Yeah.
How I balance it, I mean, I am very lucky with my current professional setup. We can work remotely. That saves me so much time. I can flex my hours because, like, as you said, I'm an equestrian. I actually go riding twice in the mornings during the work week. So I just keep my statuses up to date. And of course, my supervisor is aware and supportive of it. But, sometimes I'm reading the board book at 6 a.m. while I'm on the treadmill. Sometimes my phone is reading it aloud to me as I drive to the barn. Or I am taking an Apra call on the go, or I'm taking a work call on the go because I've got an Apra call later in that day.
Yeah.
I think what really matters is the support of my boss, that this is something that she views as very meaningful and impactful, and like raising the profile of UNICEF USA, and like helping the industry know that if you want to come work at a shop that is dedicated to best practices, here, come work with us.
Yes.
So it's definitely about prioritization, because I definitely don't get to do everything I would want to do in my job because of my volunteer commitments, but I see the force multiplier effect it's having on how I show up as a professional and how grounded I am in the industry and where our field is going. It kind of allows me to like peek into a crystal ball or around a corner and like see what's coming down the pike. I bring that to my work at UNICEF USA. And then I also have to do a little plug. Like, I have an amazing spouse. I do have a 5-year-old as well. And my spouse honestly is the only reason why I can do what I do. He does the bulk of everything around the house and parenting, and he actually likes it. I promise I'm not forcing him to do it. He's like, I like mowing the lawn. I like vacuuming. It's kind of the same thing, but one's a carpet and one's the lawn. So like he's just an amazing partner. And, I wrote a book recently and I worked on that for like a year or two. And that was lots of, hey, can you hang out with our daughter and play Tea Party while I go write the next few pages that I am behind deadline on. And it's always about evaluating like, what is the most important thing right now?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's my personal life. Sometimes that's APRA because I'm behind, or I'm like trying to be proactive, or like someone's asked me for a favor or help. Or I've got the responsibilities I signed on to as a board member. And then like, obviously it's also my work. Like the work has got to get done, at the end of the day. So it's balance and constant prioritization.
Well, hats off to your spouse. That's awesome. And I love the phrase you mentioned there, Lindsey, about the force multiplier effect. Because I think that is another really valuable consideration for people in our profession that are considering going from a volunteer at their chapter to serving as the chapter leader, and then on up the APRA hierarchy. So I really like that phrase. So thank you for that. You also mentioned relationships in an earlier part of our conversation, and I wanted to talk a little bit, or have you talk a little bit, sorry, about John Thorson, who was a mentor for you. You mentioned his name. You made a post on LinkedIn about an advancement services strategies reference guide for CASE. So what can you tell us about John, please?
Sure. So I met John when I was Apra DC president because we asked him to speak at a conference we were hosting, and he's a former president, and he helped found AASP. So like professional associations are his jam, apparently. And I had the privilege of not only having, him help me chart my career course after meeting him at that conference, but then getting to work for him at George Washington University when I was there. And he and his leadership style taught me a lot of things, and I still carry those with me. And he still is my mentor today, actually. I still get the chance to run into him professionally and see him in the DC area. So one of the things that I think John did really well that I try to emulate as a leader now is that he always told me exactly how he saw things and not necessarily what I wanted to hear. Even if it was hard for me to hear, he would still name it. And he was, at the same time, he was like very clear and affirming, like, I see the potential in you. You are an up and coming leader. But he would hold me accountable of something that I did, or I was like being petty or in my feelings about something. Like he would let me know if there was something I could be doing better. And I model a lot of that in my feedback style. So I kind of try to think at times like, what would John do?
Mhm.
And the other thing that he really helped me do, this was a more like hands-on management technique, but he helped me understand that it's easier to fix a mistake than it is to fix a micromanager. Because I definitely was feeling the micromanager at the beginning of my career because I was a control freak.
Okay.
And like that is just not sustainable with where I'm at now in my career. And I've dropped the habit. But he helped me understand that like most micromanagers are micromanagers because they are scared of a mistake being made. But by micromanaging, like you don't equip your staff to avoid making mistakes.
Sure.
You are just managing them to not make mistakes. And that just, yeah, it's not sustainable. So that was one of the things that really clicked for me when I was working with him, because he was not a micromanager. His purview was too large. There's no way that he could have done it. But, and then I think, one of the last things that really stuck with me about John, I have this very vivid memory of standing outside his cubicle, and he was like, why are people scared of me? I don't understand. Like, they're intimidated by me. And he's not a scary person. And I was like, I think it's your title. I honestly think that some staff think very hierarchically, right? And like, if it's my boss's boss's boss, oh my gosh, that's really intimidating, which they're not wrong. There is a power dynamic there. But what I have always reminded myself of after working with John is that, my CEO at UNICEF USA is a person who doesn't want people to be like skittish or scared, wants to hear what people are thinking. And, if it's the president of your university, whoever, they are just people too. And I don't get freaked out anymore. I used to earlier in my career for sure, but I've gotten more confident in just like treating them like a person, like anyone would want to be treated. And like also then reflecting that in how I try to show up as a leader at work and within Apra as being just super approachable. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And it's so important, both to have that mentorship dynamic, but also to recognize that and be vulnerable as you have been about, when you're younger in your career, there are just some hard lessons that you kind of have to go through. And for you, it was the micromanaging. And for me, it was more getting very comfortable with prospect research being a back office type and not having the confidence to argue for a voice or a seat at the table with the major gifts team, things like that. So, we all have to go through these various stages in our career that correlate with where we are in life as well, and young professionals. So thank you for that. I would love to see, you just talked a little bit about some stories about John. I would love for you to share a story of yours that you don't get to tell often enough. And you mentioned some possible conversational breadcrumbs before we started recording. So please go ahead there.
Yeah, definitely. I had to rack my brain for what might be a good touch point here, but how about a story about a podcast? Because we're on a podcast, right?
There we go.
Meta there. So circa 2020 or 2016, 2017, something like that. I'm working at George Washington University, and I'm with two of my besties. I mentioned Catherine Flatten before, but Ann Dean was our boss there, the managing director of research and relationship management. And we are a very tight-knit trio. They are two of my favorite humans that I've ever gotten to work with.
Awesome.
And we're sitting in our cube farm. That's what we called it affectionately. And Ann goes, guys, I am listening to this podcast. I don't even remember what the podcast was. I have no idea. Lost to time. But I interrupt and I'm like, podcast? Like, that's audio and no images? What? And I clearly am way behind the curve because Anne is like, oh girl. And Catherine, who is just this font of cultural references, is like, here we go again. And I'm gonna have to over-explain something to Lindsey because I have this focus strength where I will get super focused on my board commitment and what that means and what I need to get done. And I kind of get tunnel vision and I ostrich about some of the things that are going on around me. And so I had completely missed the thing that podcasts are a thing. I'm here we are today, right? So funny. I swear, like I must have deleted the podcast app off my iPhone. Like I think I heard that term once before. Anyways, I'm like such a visual person that it like, I'm glad there's video actually in this podcast because
Yes.
if you have a medium without a visual, it's just like simply like does not compute in my head. I'm just, anyways. Okay, so Anne and Catherine super annoyed at me as we're sitting there. And they get over it. They still love me. But anywho, fast forward to 2019. I am chairing the Apra Conference Planning Committee, and I'm organizing the subsequent conference, or the 2020 conference. And
Oh boy,
what happened in 2020?
yes,
It was supposed to be in DC, and we were kind of like teasing a DC. It was an election year, like that was going to be kind of our theming and branding, picking up on the location and the time.
wow.
Leading into that, so we were going to tap Frank Sesno to be our keynote. And, then the pandemic happened. We had to pivot to virtual. So we lost the DC context. But before that happened, I was sitting in Frank Sesno's office trying to pitch him on doing our keynote. And he says, well, yeah, like, okay. And hey, if you want to like promote it, we could do a podcast. And I was like, oh God, I barely even know what those are. Like, don't panic. Okay, Anne and Catherine totally prepared me for having this conversation. Thank you, Anne and Catherine. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, sure. That is a thing that we could do.
Yeah.
I'm like, just say yes to the keynote, please. And he did. But then like reality hit where I was like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? I know nothing about podcasts. I have not even listened to one before. And now I'm going to interview Frank Sesno, who is a professional interviewer, like an Emmy Award-winning broadcast journalist. And like I only had a couple days left. I had not really prepared at all. And my husband, that saint, goes like, there's that trademark Lindsey confidence. It just strikes again. Where I like just often assume like, I'll figure it out, whatever.
Yeah.
It has worked. It has not worked. It's like 50-50. And I like totally freak out the days before the podcast recording with just the pressure of like knowing who I was going to interview.
Yeah.
I do like a bunch of research because that's what we do, right? We're researchers at heart. Like, let's equip ourselves with the knowledge to do it.
Absolutely.
But I definitely went through this moment where I was like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I just feel imposter syndrome coming, like emanating from my soul.
Sure.
I don't know that I can do this. I don't know that I can pull this off. I think I might be in over my head. And I could have very easily been like, Frank, we're not going to do the podcast. No, we don't need to do that. It's okay. We're going to send marketing emails out. It's fine. But I really held myself to that and was like, this is a growth opportunity. And I definitely don't have any expertise in it, but I'm going to do my research and figure it out. And I think it's a fun story because, Apra and my besties and gas related. But I think there's also a nugget in there that I hope that the audience can take to heart, because so often when I'm talking to my team members, colleagues in our field, Apra members, I hear, well, I'm not an expert, or I don't think I have anything to offer, or I'm not qualified. I mean, I saw that about that job that I got at American University, which changed everything. And it's something that's just so ingrained in the psyche of many prospect development professionals. And I think it really holds us back. And the thing I think we should remember, after having gone through many of these situations in my life and still being fine afterward, growing through them even, 70% of learning is learning by doing. So it's a stat out there that my professional learning and leadership development team say at the beginning of every training. And you don't have to be an expert to volunteer with Apra or CASE or AASP. You do not need to be an expert. And I'd actually like folks to kind of rewire their brain. When you volunteer with an association like Apra, you learn from other professionals. You help build something concrete for the profession. You make new connections that will then further your learning later. And that is how you become an expert, is doing all of those things. You do the work, you become the expert later. And then people start calling you that. And then you have a whole new level of imposter syndrome later where you're like, oh, I think I'm an expert now, right? So I just want to help people understand that, yes, there's a time commitment, and that's everyone's, decision matrix that they need to make, whether they can take that on. But, a coach for one of my team members and they were working on confidence said to them, confidence is not the absence of self-doubt. So like, I have self-doubt all the time.
Yeah.
Like that podcast moment, right? But
Uh-huh.
it's like what you do in the face of that, or like the resources or the solution that you reach out to someone like, okay, maybe I could have found like another Apra podcast host and asked them like, how did you approach this?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just, I just want people to like understand that you don't have to be whatever you've built up into your mind to serve on a committee or to write an article or to be on a podcast. Because look, I've done a couple of podcasts since then, and I'm a huge fan, and I listen to hours of podcasts as I drive to learn. So.
Well, forgive me for referring to a term you use, but it's that force multiplier effect that you talked about. And you talked about it earlier about skills and professional benefit. But in this case, it's that the step-by-step overcoming the inherent imposter syndrome that we all have to various degrees of like, okay, like, well, I wrote this article and it was favorably received, and now XYZ on and on and on from there. So really insightful. And thank you. That was a great story to share. I appreciate that. With our last few minutes, Lindsey, talking about resources as you just did, I would love for you to talk about the UNICEF USA Prospect Development Standards of Collaboration. This is a document that you worked on, and I don't have all the details, so please fill in. But I would love to know, what was the impetus for that? I know it's been really well received. I've cited it myself in my day job, so I just would love for you to share that with our audience and talk with us about that, please.
Sure, definitely. Well, I can't take all the credit for it, but thank you.
Uh-huh.
My team has really helped me build those out. And we are still iterating them and developing. And technically, if I go back to the root of like, where did they come from? John Thorson, my mentor. I was at George Washington University, and Catherine and I, the whole team, we had them penned, not the standards of collaboration, but John's original management roles. He is a much less verbose person than I am. And so he had I think 5 or 7, something like that. And I have 3 pages. But my team wanted that. Okay. So we scaled and we addressed the needs. But really they're rooted in John's management philosophy, which is why that still sits so much with me and how I approach my team management.
Yeah.
And his voice is totally in some of those standards, like vent or solve or no heroic measures. That's him. That's his voice and influence there. And when I asked him, why did he create them originally? He said, people need clear expectations.
Yeah.
It was literally that simple. It was just stunningly simple. It's about how you set expectations. It's amazing. So that really stuck with me as I left GW. I was super excited to go start a new journey, but I was so heartbroken to leave GW. That was the closest knit family that I ever had in a work environment. But I took with me some of these amazing resources. And at UNICEF USA, the team that I was originally hired to manage was prospect intelligence, DevOps. It was a catch-all team. They had no true mission or identity. It was anything left over. And then donor communications, which I was super terrified of. I am not a strong writer. I don't care about the language in an acknowledgement. I care that the acknowledgement is strong and makes the donor feel warm and fuzzy, but that is not my lane and I don't want to wordsmith.
Yeah.
So I was very nervous going in. And it's very disparate skill sets. DevOps and prospect intelligence a little bit more closely related, but especially that wild card of donor communications. I was wow, these 3 verticals of staff, they sit 5 feet away from each other in the office, but they don't really have a sense of what each other are working on. They don't collaborate. They don't interact other than hey, good morning, how you doing?
Right.
And they didn't really ask each other, what can they lean on one another for? Where should their work intersect? How should they collaborate effectively? So I would say in my first month, I realized I needed something like John's management rules. And I was okay, but I'm going to reinvent it. I'm going to go to the max on how much guidance I think the team needs. And what I realized was that UNICEF USA wasn't just bringing me in to manage those like 3 distinct workflows, but they really needed me to build a cohesive, like operations focused team
Mm.
because they weren't a team. They were 3 distinct workflows that reported to the same position.
Okay.
They were not conversationally fluent in one another's work. They weren't cross-functional. They couldn't problem solve together. And they all just had way too much on their plates and didn't know where, like, well, they can write a query better than I can. I'll just have them write the query. Like, they didn't know how to like barter and trade like that and lean on
Mm.
one another. So, and like that's kind of like that's a very clinical management assessment that I'm making. I'm being blunt because I want to prove a point that like structurally and functionally it was a problem, but the people were not the problem. The people are great, and many of them are still on my team.
Right.
But it was just a lack of leadership and cross-functional knowledge, to be honest. And so the standards of collaboration were an attempt for me to take the 3 separate verticals, if you think of like an org chart, and turn it into like a Venn diagram of
Oh,
overlapping intersection, like the collaboration techniques of how you intersect with one another. And in that, that's where team culture is built and
yeah.
expertise and comparative advantage. And they would learn how to collaborate and how to communicate and what problems they can solve together by tapping into each other's expertise. So I
Yeah.
think the way that they have been received at UNICEF USA, we've had at least 4 other teams adapt their own versions.
Oh, cool.
And our professional learning and leadership development team has built a workshop around how to help a team develop their own version.
Mm.
We've also integrated them into interviews for candidates. So it's
Oh,
like,
wow.
here's our culture. This is the clear expectations.
Yeah.
And we cite them in performance reviews and we revisit them as a team frequently. So recently we just added a PTO checklist, which helps staff know how to prepare for, clearly communicate their coverage plan, and
Mm.
how to carve out time for them to re-enter in a way that puts their wellness at the beginning and
Oh, I love
preserves some
that.
sanity.
Yeah.
And then we also just added, literally like a week ago, added expectations around how you block out dedicated project days to advance
Mm.
capacity building projects and not get stuck in reactive.
Yeah.
And like log out of Slack, log out of email, put your out of office up, like share a list of what you're going to try and accomplish, then share what you did accomplish.
Mm.
Um, that kind of stuff. And in short, I think the head of our professional learning and leadership development team helped me understand kind of the impact that the standards of collaboration had at UNICEF USA by saying they help us know what to expect and what is expected.
Mm.
And one of the top things that the Gallup organization, which does like a lot of organizational and management material development best practices, one of their top elements of a great manager is helping your team understand and know what is expected. And so I somehow inadvertently got my team to mobilize and create this resource that solved for the number one like management element. And it was an amazing and collaborative journey. And it's not done. It's definitely a living document. And I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite things.
That's so cool. And is it okay when I post your interview if there's so I have a link
Yeah,
in
you
the
can use the LinkedIn
questionnaire
link.
I sent you, but if you're okay sharing with the larger audience, would that be
Sure,
okay?
definitely.
I think that's so interesting that it's not a static document. You just mentioned we're adding PTO into it and all these other considerations beyond the normal standards of practices and processes. Like it sounds like it's a more holistic, well-rounded approach. And yeah, like the re-entry to a work week after you've been on PTO, like that's so important, so critical. So
It is. Yeah. So like for that, we're trying to help people feel empowered and almost like held accountable to the fact that if you're gone for a week, you get 1 hour per day that you were gone of uninterrupted meeting time and no one can put meetings on your calendar and I will back the team. You get 5 hours to catch up.
wow, that's great.
Too, but like that's the recommendation. That's the starting point that we negotiate from for ourselves to make it manageable. Because we
Yeah.
had people who were going, there's just so much going on. I'm not going to take my time off. I'm going to cancel my request because our work is never done when we're trying to save children. Like,
Yeah.
right? It's a really hard thing to step away from. And this has been a tool that it actually helped one of my team members who hadn't taken time off in 3 years.
Oh my goodness. Oh my
Mhm.
goodness. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. How empowering. That is phenomenal. 3 years without a vacation. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, kudos to you, and thank you for letting me share the document when we post your interview,
Sure.
Lindsey. Well, you've covered a ton, and it's been such an insightful, fun conversation, Lindsey. Thank you for the preparation you've put into the Q&A and the really personal insights you shared along the way about mentors and the value of the Apra community, whether it's at the local or the international level. It's been really enriching, and I know our guests will enjoy our conversation. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking such great questions. They're really thought-provoking for me as I reflect back on my Apra journey and my own professional journey. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. I think I'll do an episode at some point on the way, because there's about 200 questions in a little binder. And
Awesome.
I kind of keep track of which questions I've asked at, and try not to repeat too many of them, but just a little insight here. So Lindsey, thank you. And I wish you the best at the upcoming Apra PD conference as well in Indianapolis. And our interview with Lindsey will go live probably a few weeks after that, so mid to late September. So Lindsey, thank you again for your time today. It's been an honor for me to have you on the program, and I'm glad to be connected through our Apra community.
Thank you. I appreciate it so much, Tim.
All right. And thank you to our audience for continuing to participate in these conversations when I post them on LinkedIn every Monday. Thank you for your support, comments, and likes. And we'll be back again next week with another conversation. Have a good day.